Hey folks, this is the seventh video in my series on automating the creation of Google Slides presentation decks using Google Apps Script. In the last video, I walked you through an optional workflow to extract data from ProFootballReference.com using Google's Colaboratory Python notebook and the libraries Pandas, NumPy, Beautiful Soup, and GSpread. The result of that work was a clean data set that gives us a group of NFC teams with some data so that we can populate our slide deck. So we are in our slide deck script, we have learned how to automate the creation of a deck and how to insert a slide. This video is going to focus on how to extract data from a Google Sheet workbook using Google Apps Script. So we are going to want to go back to our script file. So you're going to want your Google Sheet open. You're going to go to the extensions menu. You're going to open up Apps Script, and we are going to want to work through our current application project. So if you are joining for the first time and you want to catch up, there's a playlist linked in the description with all of the work that we've done to this point. So this video is going to result in the creation of two functions, get sheet by ID, and then another custom function called data collector. So we're going to go up to the file menu. We're going to add a new script file, and we're going to call this func02 get sheet by ID. I'm going to hit enter. We're going to clear out the boilerplate code. We're going to create a function, and we're going to call it get sheet by ID, and we're going to have one argument, which will be the sheet underscore ID. We're going to go to the right, we're going to add a curly bracket, we're going to hit enter twice, we're going to add in 2 slashes for a comment, and we are going to access the current workbook. We're going to hit enter, we're going to hit tab, and we're going to declare a variable of WB, which is short for workbook. We're going to hit space, we're going to add an equal sign, and then we are going to reference spreadsheet app. And then we're going to use dot get active spreadsheet, and we're going to have an open parentheses. We're going to go to the right, and we're going to add a semicolon. If you are using an unbounded app script file, which means that your app script is not generated by the file that you're working in, whether it's a sheet, a doc, or a deck, you cannot use the get active method. You will have to use .open by ID or open by URL. For the purposes of this tutorial, we are using a bound app script, which means that the application app script was generated using the extensions menu. We're going to hit enter twice. We're going to hit the left arrow twice. We're going to add 2 slashes and a space, and we're going to access the sheets. We're going to hit enter, we're going to hit tab, and we're going to declare a variable called sheets. We're going to set that equal to WB, that's the variable we just created, dot get capital S sheets. We're going to add an empty parentheses and a semicolon. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will loop through sheets. We're going to hit enter, we're going to hit tab, and we're going to use a for loop. So we're going to do for I in sheets. We're going to go to the left, we're going to add a curly bracket, we're going to hit enter. We're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and now we are going to evaluate the sheet ID against the input. So the input being sheet ID is going to be evaluated against sheets. So we're going to hit enter, we're going to hit tab, and we're going to use a conditional if, and we're going to say if sheets square bracket with that variable I, which is short for iterator. We're going to go to the right of the square bracket. We use dot get capital S sheet capital I lowercase d ID, open parentheses, go to the right, hit space, have 2 equal signs, space, and then pass that sheet underscore ID input. So what this will do is this will evaluate sheets.getSheetID to see if it is equal to the input value. So if you input 0 in here and we loop through all of the sheets, and the first sheet is 1, and the second sheet is 2, and the third sheet is 0, that will then meet the criteria of our conditional, which will allow that sheet ID to move on to the next step of our loop. So we're going to hit space, we're going to add in curly brackets, we're going to hit enter, we're going to add 2 slashes, and now we are going to log the sheet name. We're going to hit enter, we're going to hit tab, and we're going to use var sheet capital N name, and we're going to set that equal to sheets square bracket I. Go to the left, hit dot, get sheet with a capital S, name capital N, and then we're going to have empty parentheses. We're going to go to the right, and we're going to add a semicolon. We're going to hit down arrow once, down arrow twice, enter once, enter twice, left arrow once, left arrow twice, 2 slashes, and then we will access the sheet using the get sheet by name method. We're going to hit enter, we're going to hit tab, and then we will return WB dot get capital S sheet capital B by capital N name, empty parentheses, and then we're going to pass in sheet capital N name. We are getting sheet capital N name from line 14, where we are programmatically extracting the name associated with the sheet ID that matches the sheet ID input that is passed to this function. So again, if we have 3 sheets in a workbook, the IDs being 3, 2, and 0, right? These are just placeholders. This is a totally hypothetical situation. It will never happen. But if you have those 3 sheet IDs and you pass 0 into line 1, right? So you call get sheet by ID and then you put a 0 here. This loop will loop through all the sheets and it will say for I in sheets. And that will mean that when you call sheets square bracket I dot get sheet ID, you will then pass all of the sheet IDs into this if statement. So if you have 0 as the value that is passed into the function, and the sheet ID is equal to 3, it does not meet the conditional, therefore it does not move forward. If the same instance happens and the sheet ID is 2, it does not meet the conditional and it does not move forward. If the sheet ID is 0 and it matches sheet ID of 0, then it moves forward in here, at which point we extract the name using the iterator. So it is a logical statement that is using a number to get a value. And that's how we create an ironclad function that will not break. Because if you attempt to use get sheet by name and the name of the sheet changes, your logic breaks and then you're going to have to open it up and clean it up. So if you're on vacation and somebody changes the sheet name, your app will not work until you come back and change it. That's why I believe get sheet by ID is the most effective way to extract data from a Google Sheet. Cool, so we're going to save our project. You can see we now have that ability to sort our files alphabetically. We will do so, and now func1 is followed by func2, and we go up to our add a file, and we are going to add a new script file, and we're going to call this func03 colon data collector. Okay, so data collector is going to provide us with logic that will allow us to extract data based upon the name that we pass to it. So we're going to build out a function. We're going to call it data capital C collector. We're going to have no arguments for now while we develop this function, but we will eventually pass to there. We hit space after the empty parentheses and we add curly brackets. We hit enter twice, add in 2 comments, and we are going to begin by using the get sheet by ID function. So we're going to hit enter, we're going to do tab, and we're going to declare a new variable called sheet, and that is going to be equal to that get sheet by ID function that we just created. We are going to pass a sheet ID in there. Now, eventually we'll have an argument that we will pass into the function so that when we use it, we will define that sheet. But for now, we're going to create some development variables. So we're going to go up a couple lines, hit enter, add 2 slashes, hit enter once, and hit tab, and then we're going to declare var of name, and we're going to set that equal to empty parentheses, go to the right, add a semicolon, hit enter, and then we're going to declare a variable of sheet underscore ID, and we're going to set that to, I'm going to set it to 0. You are going to determine what your sheet ID is by where your data exists. So if your data exists in sheet 1 and the GID is 0, you're going to pass 0 too. If your GID is something else, which you can see up here, this sheet 2 is GID is equal to this set of numbers, that's what you're going to pass in for this sheet underscore ID variable. We're going to leave name blank for now, but we're going to come back to it. So in order to set ourselves up for our function development, we are going to add sheet underscore ID into the get sheet by ID function. And now we are referencing this hard-coded variable, which will eventually become a dynamic variable that will be passed into our function up here. More on that in a bit. We are going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, 2 slashes, and a space. And now we are going to get the display values from the sheet. So we're going to hit enter, we're going to hit tab, and we're going to declare a variable called display, capital V, values. And we're going to set that equal to sheet, which is the variable that we just created here, dot get range. We're going to open up a parentheses. Get range takes 4 arguments, the starting row, the starting column, the number of rows you want to go, and the number of columns you want to go. So we are going to start at row 1, comma, column 1, comma, and then we are going to reference the sheet.getLastRow, which will get us the last row of data. So this method operates as a count. So when you use sheet.getLastRow, it returns the number of rows that have data, not necessarily the last row that has data. So what I mean by that? So if we go into sheet 1 and we reference sheet 1, the result of this will be 21. And the reason for that is because row 21 is the last row with data. If you wanted to get the last row in the spreadsheet, you would use .getMaxRow, which will just return all the rows that exist. GetLastRow returns the result of the number of rows that have data in it. So it'll just say like 21, right? And I apologize because I think I said the wrong thing just now. If you added in like a value down here, it would return the number 25. So you know what, let's just do a quick little test on this one so that you can kind of see it. So I'm just going to leave this one here. I'm going to hit enter and I'm going to do logger.log. I'm going to use sheet.getLastRow. I'm going to use an empty parentheses. You don't have to do this. I'm going to hit save. If you do this, you will then be prompted to ask for permissions. So, you know, if you're not doing this now, you can do it in a little bit. If you've been following along with this series, you've done this a couple times now, so you know what we're coming into. We're just going to allow Google to read from our sheets. And now you can see that we're returning the number 21. So I'm just going to go in here real quick and delete all this stuff. And I'm going to bring it back. But when we hit run, you'll see that we still will get 21. And that's because it's not counting the number of rows that have data. It's returning the last row that has data. So this is row 21. So we are getting the number 21. So if you use that, you might have to do some type of logical cleaning in the event that you don't actually want 21 rows of data. So then we're going to use sheet.getLastColumn, same thing, empty parentheses in here. And now the results of this, when we do logger.log, will be, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that yet. My apologies. Go back to the display values row. And after sheet.getLastColumn, empty parentheses, and then a closing parentheses, do dot get capital D display values. There is a get display value and a get display values. Make sure that you're using get display values. Have an empty parentheses, go to the right, choose a semicolon. Now when you run this, if you have not authorized permissions in the previous run, you will have to do so now. After you do that, you will get all of the data. So now you can see we get our first row all the way through the 21st row. So we have all of our data in here. Now, the structure of this data is values, which means these are no longer numbers, floats, whatever. They are string objects. So if you try to do math, meaning if you try to add the wins to the losses to the ties, you will not be able to do so with get display values. If you are looking to do math, you can use .get, I think, values. So if you return get values, you will then have the raw data, right? So you can see now that these wins are represented as float values, which means they have a decimal point. So if you wanted to add wins to losses to ties, you would have the ability to do so. But the problem is that then they are going to show up that way, so you're going to have to reformat the data later. I personally prefer not to do math if I can avoid it within Google Apps Script. I would prefer to clean it, whether it's in the sheet or in Python before pushing it to the sheet, or with SQL before pushing it to the sheet, whatever. So this tutorial is going to do display values. If you are interested in math functions, hit me up and I'll figure out how to do the thing and come up with a lesson or what have you. Cool. So we're going to move on to the next step here. We're going to hit enter. We're going to add in 2 slashes for a comment, and we are going to extract the column names. So we're going to hit enter. We're going to hit tab. We're going to do var, and then we're going to call column capital N names. And we're going to set that equal to display values, which is that variable that we just created. And then we're going to use a square bracket and 0. The reason that we want to do this is because we are going to loop through the display values to have them align with the name, which is going to be one argument in our function. So we're still going to want to return that header row, but that header row is going to be excluded as part of our loop because there is no name that aligns with the header row. The header row has an ambiguous title of team, whereas we are going to be referencing team names. And you'll see more of that in a little bit as we move on to the next step, which is going to be hitting enter, adding 2 slashes, and then adding in a data collector array. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to declare a variable of data capital C collector, and we're going to set that equal to an empty array. So you can see we just have 2 square brackets with a semicolon. We are going to push values into the data collector array so that we can then use those values. I'm going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, add 2 slashes for a comment, and we are going to, what are we going to do? Oh, I see. Okay. So we are going to loop. Actually, you know what we'll do? We will append the column names first. So we are going to hit enter, hit tab, and then we're going to reference data collector, and then we're going to use dot push, and we'll use an empty parentheses, and then we're going to pass those column names in there. And then I'm going to log this out real quick just so you can see what output will be. So you can see we now have a list of lists, or a 2-dimensional array, where we have those column names in here. And you can tell it's a 2-dimensional array because we have 2 square brackets at the beginning and 2 square brackets at the end. So the first square brackets represent the list of lists, and the second square bracket represents the list. So this is a 2-dimensional array with 1 array in it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hit enter, 2 slashes for a comment, and we are going to loop through the data to see if the name matches the input. So the input will be a variable that is passed to this function. So what we're going to do is we are going to take one of the names. So I'm going to select the Philadelphia Eagles. So I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste it into that name variable. Again, this is just a development variable so that we can leverage variable names while we are developing our logic. So we're going to hit enter, we're going to hit tab, and we're going to use a for loop. I'm going to have an empty parentheses, and we're going to construct a variable. I'm going to use I, and I'm going to say for I in display values, which is this variable on line 11. We're going to go to the right of the parentheses. We're going to hit space. We're going to add curly brackets. We're going to hit enter. we're going to add a conditional to evaluate the input name. We hit enter, we're going to hit tab, and we are going to use an if statement with an open parentheses. And we're going to say if display values square bracket I, and then we're going to go to the right and we're going to add another square bracket and we're going to use the number 1. The reason that we're doing that is because we are referencing the list and the second point in the list. So the way that our display values is formatted, I'm going to comment this out so that you can see it, because I think it's a little ambiguous to speak about the way that I'm speaking about it. So I'm going to use logger.log display values up top here. I'm going to run this function again. So what we're getting in here is a two-dimensional array or a list of lists. So as I said, these square brackets denote that it's a two-dimensional array. The reason for that is because the first dimension is the list number that you want to access. So arrays are 0 indexed, which means the first value is represented by a 0, right? So instead of being 1, 2, 3, which would be a 1 index, we are using a 0 index where the values begin at 0, 1, 2. So in this case, we have multiple lists. So every time that you see square bracket pairs like this, that's a list. Square brackets like that, that's a list. Square brackets like this, that's a list. So thus far, I have denoted 3 lists. The index of those lists are 0, 1, and 2 because arrays are structured in a 0 index. So if you wanted to reference a two-dimensional array or access a point within a two-dimensional array, your first dimension that you need to denote is the list. And the way that you denote that is by using a square bracket. So when we're using display values square bracket I is a variable value because we are using the for loop mechanism to loop through all of the lists in the display values two-dimensional array or list of lists. So when you're using I like this, you're going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through all of the display values. So when we have a conditional like this and we're using display values variable I, we are allowing ourselves to loop through all those lists. If we want to access a specific point within the list, we can use a second square bracket to denote the access point. So when you look at the layout of our data, we'll start here. The first index is year. The second index is team. So when we want to use the name in order to have a conditional statement to say if this, then that, and we decide that it is the name, we are going to want to access the second point within the list. So given that the list is 0 index, year is 0, team is 1. So when we say if display values variable list array point 1 is equal to name, we are saying if the display values name column matches the name input, we want you to do something. So that's what's happening here. I hope that was easy to follow along with and that it wasn't too abstract. But now that we have this logic here that says if display values index variable array point 1 is equal to name, we're going to hit space after that parentheses. We're going to add curly bracket pairs. And we are going to push the list into the data collector. So we're going to hit enter and tab, and then we are going to say data collector dot push, and then we are going to push in display values, square bracket I, because we want all of the display values. And now the result of this, we're going to use some logging here. So we'll say /logging or return. That way we give ourselves some space. We're going to use a tab and we're going to say logger.log, and then we are going to log out that data collector variable. So because we have the name Philadelphia Eagles, what should happen is we're going to have some logging that shows us all of the display values, and then another set of logging that will show us the data collector. So we're going to run this, and we should only see Philadelphia data in the second log, and that is exactly what we got, right? So you can see when we collected the display values here for line 12, we got everybody. So you can see we have New York Giants, we have Dallas Cowboys, we have the Washington team. And then down here, we said if the display values in access point 1 is equal to the name variable, which up top here is Philadelphia Eagles, then allow that data to be pushed into the data collector variable, which is why down here you're seeing Philadelphia Eagles. So if we run this again, and I change this from Philadelphia Eagles to Dallas Cowboys, then you can see once again we got all the data, and then we are just getting the Dallas Cowboys. So now what we're going to do is we are going to remove this logger.log and turn it into a return statement. And instead, we are going to return data collector and add a semicolon. Additionally, we are going to remove that logger. You can either comment it out or delete it. And we are going to comment out our development variables. So what we will do instead is we will pass name, comma, sheet_ID. So the exact same development variables are now being pushed into our function, so that now we can use this function throughout our script, and it will allow us to dynamically reference name and sheet ID. So we're going to save this. Now, for those of you who don't have experience working with functions like this, if you try to run this data collector function in this window, you're going to get an error like this. And the reason for that is because name and sheet ID have not been defined. So name, sheet ID is now being passed in here as a string. And that's why you're getting read properties of null on line 11, because you're attempting to get that sheet ID and then extract data values from it. And there is no sheet ID in your Google Sheet that is called GID equal to sheet_ID. So you can no longer test data collector in the data collector file. You can now go to your code.gs, and we're going to go in here, and we are going to hit enter and say test our function, and we're going to hit tab, and we're going to hit space, and we are going to use logger.log, and we're going to use a parentheses, and we are going to use data collector with an open parentheses, and now we're going to pass a name. So I'm going to do Philadelphia space Eagles, and then I'm going to use a comma, and then I'm going to pass in sheet ID 0. I'm going to save it, and I am going to run my function. And now you can see I have extracted data about the Philadelphia Eagles. I could also go in here and, we'll spread it around a little bit. Let's do the Giants. So we'll do New York Giants, and we'll run it again. And now we're just extracting data about the Giants. Cool. So I hope you found this video useful. Oh, last thing that we'll do here is we're just going to sort our files alphabetically. So now we have all of our functions in one place and our slide functions in another. I hope you found this video useful. I think that this is a really helpful set of functions to use in any project, let alone this one. If you want to catch up on all the stuff that we've been doing and what we will be doing, there's a playlist in the description with all the videos. Reach out if you have any comments or questions. I love hearing from you. And I hope you'll check out the next video in the series.